It is 12:38 in the morning for Thursday, September 25th. Got not a lot right now because, once again, I have been studying kanji and doing some readings. But, I just kind of been doing a lot of work recently. Like, my days have been very, very full, and I'll get done with it around, 10 o'clock, and I just don't want to leave my room at that point. So this is actually one of the first nights this week where I have been outside of my room past midnight, which, to be honest, is a very big accomplishment for me. Because Monday I just kind of did work, went to the gym, showered, stayed in my room. Tuesday, did work, and then I had practice really late at night, which was really annoying, and got in to go to bed. Wednesday, which is technically today, I decided to stay out just because I got a lot of influx of things I needed to do. But it's just, this history course I'm taking is really annoying for me right now because, for one, I like doing, it's an interview, it's an oral history thing, and I need to find somebody who's Korean to do an interview. I had 2 people who were interested, one person backed out, the other person didn't respond, and then I tried to contact a professor, but he didn't interview previously, and he thought that it would be redundant for him to do another interview, which makes sense, and that's just really unfortunate, even though it would have been a really, really cool guy to interview because he's Korean film. But I'm doing just general research, I've been doing a lot of research on Korean media, and articles about Old Boy and Memories of Murder and how one of them is linked to a shooting at Virginia Tech, the Korean National, which is crazy because I don't even remember. This is before the real height of all of those. And then I got really really depressing news articles because I can ask very simple questions, but I really, really want to get to the difference between media in Korea versus media in the U.S. and how maybe this latent stage of U.S. culture and politics and the current socioeconomic or socio-political state of the world, that the violence in the media that has been so prominent in Korean and U.S. media, we take that just kind of for granted. Old Boy is violent. There's a linking to a shooting, but it's just not, I didn't actually see it as violence. It was just normal action with some very disturbing elements but the action was not what I was thinking of. It wasn't the revenge, because I've seen John Wick. I've seen so many things that are about revenge. Even when you talk about I'm kind of repeating what I already talked about, but when you talk about Memories of Murder, the romanticization of American serial killers has been so prominent that it's very hard to see that as something other than just, another serial killer. Even though at that point in that side, and I really wish I could find The Chaser, but I can't find a place to watch that without doing a subscription, and I'm not doing that, it's really prominent. There's 2 really prominent serial killers in Korea, and we get so much in the U.S. And it's really interesting to me, this desensitization to violence that I have, and I wonder if somebody who's Korea, who has a connection to Korean media and to this, sees that disconnection and disassociation. And then I did some bunch of things. Idol culture, video game culture, the depression and stuff that come along with that. And it's a little bit different than the U.S., and usually idol culture is not a thing we have in the U.S., and I just find that interesting. I'd love to see the differences in how people talk about it. But another thing I really got into, and a really big thing about is Korean diaspora, which is basic information just about people coming over from Korea to the U.S. And I do a lot of research just about when people would come over, why people would come over, and it's so depressing. There's books about that I've been reading for class that have been talking about their experiences in the 1970s, 1980s, when people came over after the Korean War, and the racism and everything going along, and it's very depressing to read. And I had to go through a reading on the Rodney King riots, which is like a very big deal in Los Angeles and something that really does not get talked about, mostly because it's contemporary U.S. history, and contemporary being in the 70s, but something that's not really taught in class, even though it's a very pivotal marking point of U.S. race relations. I mean, you have a racist scenario where somebody white cops beat up a black person and to death and then got acquitted, and it's very, not gonna lie, it's very on track for what's currently happening now. But that also, the tensions were inflated when a Korean shopkeep shot a young girl, I believe, and she died, and that just started this huge kind of like race war, but also this against the police riot stuff that all happened. And you're talking about how like over 2,000 Korean shops were like burned to the ground, causing over like $1 billion in property damage, and a bunch of other things because of this really hard these problems. And I mean, like, there's these images of Korean people on the roofs of shops with what looks like M1 Garand, like that type of thing, like bold action, like very. And like I kept reading and people were like, oh, the rooftop Korean memes. I'm like, who's putting this into a meme? It was really low-key quite disturbing to like read all this history and all this problem. And what's really interesting about that time period is that those two racial groups went through, I wouldn't say similar things, because I mean, slavery is a very big proponent for black culture and history. And there's nothing really comparable to that, but Korea did a lot of slavery, but that was, I think, a lot longer ago. But they also went through a lot of oppression, Japanese oppression. They went through the U.S. militarization and the Korean War and a bunch of other things that kind of went down that were pretty bad. So the generational trauma, while it may have been different, is very similar between black Americans and Korean Americans. But it's really interesting that even culminated with one thing happening, even though the tensions were really high due to the Rodney King situation, that was just broken apart and this race war happened. And it's really interesting because while I can't say that both of them had the worst of times, reading all these things about these people during that time, I mean, if you come in, Korea is a relatively small nation and relatively new nation in comparison to Japanese and Chinese. And you look at the Korean or the Chinese Communist Party, that was definitely a big problem, like the 70s, Red Scare, McCarthyism. But you also look at Japanese, which had a long time hate within the U.S. because of World War II. So Koreans are always caught in this scenario, especially in the reading that I just did, where it was like, oh, are you Korean or Japanese? And they'll always make fun of them, or not Korean, are you Chinese or Japanese? And they'll make fun of them and be like, no, I'm Korean. And they'll be like, I don't know what that means. That you're Asian, that means you're bad. So both races had really hard time with the upbringings of America and this generational trauma, and yet they decided to have this kind of war. I guess it's technically described, but it's more of a riot against each other. And it's really interesting about how that kind of just went down and how this tension came about from two very downtrodden and trauma-induced parties within the U.S. But yeah, this is interesting because I have a very big interest in, I think, Asian history and culture in general. I don't really know why. I really love Asian films in general. I have a really hard time watching Chinese films just because the language doesn't have enough consonants, and that really messes with my brain, and it doesn't, my ears don't like it. So, I watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's just so difficult for me to listen to, and that's just my brain being weird. No hate to any of the Chinese media, but I mean, Japanese media, I love anime in general, but the 90s, 80s anime are incredible. I mean, Perfect Blue, but like even the live action, Cure is fantastic. But then Korean media also has all those things. And I love, I mean, just that era of non-Western media that have really interesting storytelling, like Soviet era. So I love that. But I would say I love learning about things that the U.S. doesn't care about. I mean, the Korean War is the forgotten war. It's literally something that it's named because nobody remembers it or nobody cares to remember it. It doesn't really matter at this point. People talk about World War II because of the mass casualties, World War I because of being the first war, all the other American wars because we're American wars that happened on our turf, I guess, and the Vietnam War and Iraq. Iraq because it's in the modern media era, but Vietnam because of the not hippieism, but like why are we being involved in something just for our needs and having a bunch of our people die? It was just very unpopular thing. But Korean War is never talked about. And I find that very, very interesting. And I think another time that I would be very interested in history is World War One, because again, for the same reason, it's not talked about at all. Like we get the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot. That war started. The war kept going. The Americans joined the war in like the last 2 years. The war ended, and that's pretty much it. But there's so many things going along. It's the birth of modern warfare. I mean, that's a big part. The Geneva Convention, Canada doing war crimes, or what things causing war crimes to be existed, which is, I think, really interesting and funny, even though it's really bad. But it's also like it shaped Europe. Countries, that was like the first time in like really outside of the Berlin Wall falling, that was the last time that Europe was shaped. And it's so cool. And so it's a time in history that as a U.S. student, we don't learn about because the U.S. really didn't do much in it. Even though we kind of say, when we won the war, we didn't do much in it. It was everything else. And I mean, All Quiet on the Western Front is about World War I, and I loved reading and watching those movies. 1917 has been by far one of in my top 10 movies of all time. And so there's all this forgotten history that is so interesting to learn about. But it's also, when you learn about these things, it's very important for me to learn about it outside the context of a U.S. perspective. Because U.S. has a way of spinning it to make it look good for them. I mean, Vietnam was a huge thing. The propaganda to the Red Scare and that whole era was made so that the Vietnam would look good, and the only reason that it wasn't made to look good is because of the films and all that afterwards, and all that happened. That was like the big start of anti-American warfare and being in war and all that. But I mean, World War II, you learn about some of the really. World War II is kind of hard because it's really hard to justify that the good guys did bad things when you're looking at some of the worst people in history. World War I is also, American was never really into it, so it's hard to do that. But I mean, you look at Iraq, Iran, a bunch of other things. In the modern sphere, looking at very anti-military industrial complex, militarism, and all this, and you look back to the after effects of World War I, like you talk about how the Japanese oppressed Korea after that times, but the U.S. came in and did the same exact thing. Like, it's really interesting to read about this and the complicit nature of the U.S. when it comes to active war crimes and horrible mass graves and a bunch of other things that come in that just kind of happened. Like, they literally put somebody in power, Syngman Rhee, I think, that was so close to being a fascist that even the guy, like, praised Hitler Youth and a bunch of other things. He was a very far, far right person. And it's really interesting to read about this, and you're reading and you're listening in class, and you're like, wow, America was not a good thing for the Koreans. Like, it's so interesting to learn about history through the eyes of somebody who isn't part of the American government, and who isn't part of the system that wants to make America look good. It's I don't know, that's like, I love that part of history, and I don't have a lot of options to do history because of the major I'm in, and the aspirations I have cause me to have less time to take classes, even though this is a very interesting course. And then cinema, I would love to take a cinema studies course, but I just won't have the time. But it's just, all this is so interesting, and these history topics, while they've been currently very, very depressing, are very, very cool and part of history. Like, my friend who is probably, I think he wants to be a history major, which is a really dumb choice, like, not gonna lie. You can be a good history major, but, like, in this economy, like, we have a business finance major, a computer science major who's probably going to be doing a statistics or data science major as well, plus getting a post-grad in engineering. You have an aerospace engineer and then a history major. Don't worry, his parents are very, very rich, and he's 100% a trust fund baby. Kind of adds to his personality. But it's really funny, but when I was talking about him with him, he's like, yeah, World War I is my favorite time of history because, again, it's so unknown. It's something that we do not learn about, and it reshaped history as we know it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents about history, because it is really cool. I'm just kind of frustrated that it's not really going my way right now. I know it will be fine. I have a lot to talk about with somebody I find to interview, but I don't know anybody who's Korean. The people that I was going to decided no. And everybody on the hockey team that I know are either Japanese or Chinese. It's really annoying because there's nobody that I know that's Korean. Like, I've never had a Korean friend. They've literally always been Japanese or Chinese. And it's really annoying right now is because I just need somebody who's Korean. But yeah, it's going to be fine. But this class is fun. It's an hour and 15-minute class, and it really doesn't feel like that because it's very engaging. I do kind of wish that we had a smaller class. It would be a little bit better to do discussions, because at boarding school, that was a really big proponent, is that you would do discussion-based classes. And at college, it's sometimes not really possible with the amount of people. I have one class that is outside of language, because language doesn't really count, but I have one class that is very, very small, and it's a high-level computer science course, so we talk a lot because we can. But yeah, I miss that collaboration because that's really fun. But now it is almost 1 o'clock, which means I need to stop talking. But yeah, I have to get my skate sharpened on Friday. Tomorrow is like my quote-unquote last day because Friday is just one class and I don't have to pay attention in that class anyways. So we'll just have to make it through the day. I have no practice. I can do a late night workout and then go to bed and be fine. So that's it. Hopefully everything goes well. I just have to do this weekend. I also have to do some application work for abroad stuff, but everything else should be fine. So we'll just kind of see how it goes.